There I was just trying to move into my new cabana when the words came slicing through the quiet. "I am the law." That's exactly what the neighborhood HOA Queen, Karen, level intensity and all, shouted as she picked up her phone to call the police on me. I was in the middle of unloading boxes from my moving truck into what I thought was my peaceful, $500,000 dream home by the lake, but apparently, according to one Victoria Cross, my truck was disturbing the peace. Next thing I knew, the cops showed up to investigate how broken bar me for moving into my own house. Victoria, standing nearby like she just secured a military victory, had this smug look plastered across her face. She had no idea who she was messing with, a guy who dives headfirst into obsessive research whenever he feels challenged. And what I uncovered about her beloved hoe, it was the kind of dirty history that could bring her little fiefdom crashing down. Turns out, she'd been part of a 15-year scam siphoning money from every neighbor on the block. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to deal with a nightmare hoe, because here's how mine started. After years of grinding away as a game developer and saving every dime, I'd finally bought my lakeside escape, a tranquil slice of heaven where I could code in peace, watch the sunset over the water, maybe even teach myself to fish like my dad used to. The truck was just starting to back into the driveway when I got my first real look at the lake behind my cabin, a glass-clear water stretching toward the horizon. For a few blissful seconds, I felt like I'd finally made it. Then she appeared, Victoria Cross. At first glance, it wasn't her neatly pressed outfit or her severe vibe that stood out, it was how she moved, like a predator on familiar ground. Every step was deliberate, her gaze swept over my property like she was evaluating a crime scene at each box. The truck, even how I stood on my own driveway. I was lugging a box of computer gear from the truck, already sweating despite the crisp morning air, when this woman in her late 50s came power walking across the street like she owned the zip code, hair in a tight, silver bun, that infamous combo, a white blouse, khaki pants, the kind of outfit that practically demanded to speak with a manager. But it was her eyes that really said it all, measuring, calculating, and totally unapologetic. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp and authoritative, the kind that makes you freeze whether you want to or not. "Your truck is blocking traffic." I looked up, scanned the completely empty street, then looked back at her. Birds chirped, not a single car in sight. My truck, fully parked on my driveway. "Sorry about that," I replied, putting the box down and wiping my hands on my jeans. "I can move it if it's in the way." Just trying to get everything inside. She didn't even respond. Instead, she slowly pulled out her phone with the kind of deliberate flair that said, "This isn't my first complaint." 911, she said calmly. "I need to report a traffic obstruction in the Lakeside Meadows community." I stood there, stunned, watching this woman report me for moving into my own house. "Ma'am," I said, trying again, "I can move the truck. It'll take 30 seconds. She raised a single, manicured finger to silence me, then continued with the dispatcher, "There's a large commercial vehicle blocking the street. The driver is being uncooperative." Uncooperative? I hadn't even had the chance to cooperate yet. When she finally ended the call, she turned to me with a smile that never touched her eyes. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said. There was a strange, almost predatory tone in her voice. "I'm Victoria Cross, president of the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association." Then came the line, "I'm the law here." The way she said it sent a shiver through me. This wasn't just a cranky neighbor having a rough morning, this was someone who believed she had real power over me, my home, my life. 10 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled up. Out stepped Officer Johnson, a weary-looking man who radiated the energy of someone stuck in a loop. "Morning, Mrs. Cross," he sighed. "What's the issue today?" "Today?" So this was a regular thing. She launched into a detailed and highly dramatized version of my so-called traffic violation. Officer Johnson listened patiently, occasionally glancing at the still empty street with the resigned look of someone who's heard it all before. When she finished, he turned to me. "You moving in, son?" "Yes, sir. Just bought the place. I can move the truck if needed." He looked at the truck, then the street, then back at Victoria with a familiar kind of frustration. His expression said it all. This wasn't really about the truck. "Mrs. Cross," he finally said, "the vehicle's on his property. It's not obstructing traffic." Then he turned back to me with a small nod. "Welcome to the neighborhood. You'll figure out how to navigate things." The way he said navigate things carried the weight of experience, a quiet warning wrapped in polite sympathy. As the cruiser pulled away, I turned back to unpacking, eager to be done with this strange welcome. But Victoria wasn't done yet. She lingered, eyes scanning my cabin like a realtor sizing up a new listing. "Beautiful place," she finally said, her tone filled with something that made my skin crawl. "My family used to own all this land, you know, every acre." It didn't sound like nostalgia, it sounded like a claim, like she still thought it belonged to her. It wasn't just a look of nostalgia in her eyes, it was like something had been taken from her, something she fully intended to reclaim. "All of it," she said again, eyes locked on my house. "Every single acre." As she turned and walked away, whatever joy I'd felt about my new home drained from me like water slipping through a cracked foundation. What had I just stepped into? What do you think she's really after? If you've ever faced a horror story like this, hit the comments with a Karen alert. 3 days later, I decided to apply for a permit to build a small dock. Nothing elaborate, just a wooden platform where I could enjoy my morning coffee and launch a kayak now and then. I spent 2 solid nights digging into the HOA rulebook, city codes, and environmental policies. I measured every inch, drew up blueprints, and even included a basic environmental review. I wanted to make sure every box was checked. After the warm greeting I got from Victoria, playing it safe seemed like the smartest move. The first version of my permit application was a masterpiece, 23 pages of neatly organized documentation, architectural diagrams, lists of materials, site plans, and a thoughtful explanation of how the project would fit within local guidelines. I submitted everything online to the HOA's Architectural Review Board early on that Tuesday. By that same afternoon, I got a response. Denied. The reason? Missing comprehensive environmental impact study. I blinked at the screen, confused. I had submitted an environmental review, just apparently not one that met their mysterious definition of comprehensive. So I brought in a professional. I hired an environmental consultant, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who charged me $800 to treat my modest 12 by 8 foot dock like it was a federal dam project. She collected soil samples, water samples, and pH readings, cataloged the surrounding wildlife, and produced a 47-page analysis. Her conclusion? My dock would have no more impact on the lake than a duck landing on the water. She included everything: photos from every angle of the proposed build site, water depth charts, current flow measurements, and a detailed analysis of how the structure might affect spawning fish. She even interviewed my neighbors about wildlife activity, documented each tree within 50 feet, and pulled historical data on water levels going back 5 years. It felt more like a NASA mission briefing than a permit request for a dock smaller than most dining room tables. Feeling confident I had gone above and beyond, I resubmitted the application, now bolstered with this gold standard report. Surely this would clear the bar. 2 days later, rejected again. This time, the reason was that the proposed materials were not aesthetically consistent with community standards. I had specified basic pressure-treated lumber, the same stuff used for the HOA's own community dock. But fine, I could adapt. I went to the upscale lumberyard on the far side of town and upgraded the plan to use premium cedar, an extra $500 out of pocket. This new materials list was yacht-worthy. Then came rejection number 3. This one was quicker than the last. Application denied. Proposed structure may be visually disruptive to lake-facing residents. Visually disruptive? It was a dock, not a steel tower. By now, it was obvious. This had nothing to do with policy or guidelines. It was about control. Still, I wasn't ready to back down. I redesigned the entire dock, cutting it down to a tiny 6 by 6 foot platform, barely big enough to fit a folding chair. There was no way they could object to something that small. It was practically invisible. Rejection number 4 came with a new twist. Application denied. Pending written approval from 75% of neighborhood residents. They wanted me to go door to door like I was campaigning for office. So that's what I did. I spent the better part of a Saturday walking through the neighborhood, knocking on doors and politely explaining my humble dock project. Most people were sympathetic, but cautious. Sorry, said a woman from house number 12. "We just don't want to stir up anything with Victoria." An older couple with matching kayaks actually chuckled. "Good luck," the husband said. "We've been trying to repaint our fence for 3 years." That day, I had my first real conversation with Walter Hayes, an older man in his early 70s who lived just a few houses down. A retired professor, his weathered face hinted at years spent outside, soaking in the sun and the seasons. When I explained the dock drama, Walter gave me part sympathy, part something else I couldn't place. "Son," he said, casting a glance toward Victoria's house, "anything to do with that lake, a broken bar, it gets complicated." The way he said complicated sounded less like a technical issue and more like a warning. "There's a history here most folks don't know," he added, then paused, as if reconsidering. "But that's not really mine to tell." By the end of the weekend, I had gathered signatures from roughly 60% of the neighborhood. But even with all my door knocking, 60% wasn't enough. The HOA bylaws are written like they were meant for a constitutional amendment. It required a supermajority for any changes to lakefront property. I was starting to feel like Charlie Brown trying to kick the damn football, only this time, Victoria was Lucy, yanking it away every time I got close. Then came the email that changed everything. It hit my inbox with a subject line that sounded official enough. HOA property map, a reference copy. Attached was a PDF. I opened it, and within seconds, my stomach dropped, my skin went cold. According to the map, the entire shoreline of the lake, including the part directly behind my house, was classified as HOA property. Not just the community dock or common trails. All of it. I stared at the screen in disbelief, rereading it again and again, praying I was misunderstanding something. But it was all there, in black and white. My $500,000 lakefront property apparently didn't include legal access to the lake itself. I bought a lake house but I couldn't walk to the lake. Tell me how that's legal. Drop a scammed in the comments if you think I just got royally hosed. I spent the next 48 hours obsessing over that map. According to the HOA, I owned my house, the yard, the soil under my feet, but the second I stepped toward the water, I'd be trespassing. It was like buying a car and being told you couldn't use any public roads. It didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. By Thursday morning, I'd had enough. This was absurd, and I wasn't just going to roll over. I didn't care how many maps Victoria sent me. I'd bought waterfront property, and I was going to act like it. Time to test their so-called boundary. What were they going to do? Call the police on me for walking in my own backyard? At around 10 a.m., I stepped outside like I did every morning, only this time, I kept walking. Calm, steady, confident, just me and 30 feet of grass separating my deck from the lake. My plan was simple: walk down to the edge, maybe waden up to my ankles, snap a photo, and go back inside to start figuring out how to legally blow a hole through this ridiculous HOA claim. I made it about halfway to the water when Victoria materialized. No exaggeration, 1 second I was alone, the next she was standing there like she teleported from a secret HOA surveillance bunker. Clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. It was like she'd been watching me through binoculars. "Stop right there," she shouted, and I swear I could hear the glee in her voice. "You are trespassing on HOA property." She already had the paperwork in hand. I kid you not, an official-looking violation notice, a printed copy of that same HOA map, and her phone was already recording. It felt like she was filming a wildlife documentary and I was the endangered species. "I am calling the police to report criminal trespass," she announced loudly enough for the whole block to hear. I looked around. Curtains twitched, blinds shifted, faces were appearing in windows like it was a neighborhood soap opera. Great. Week 1 in my new home and I was already starring in the local reality show. "Ma'am," I said, trying to stay calm, "this is literally my backyard. I just want to touch the water. I own lakefront property." But she ignored me, finger raised like a traffic cop, already on the phone with 911. "Yes, I need officers dispatched to Lakeside Meadows. The individual is violating HOA boundaries and has been previously warned." Previously warned? Other than that time she snapped at my moving truck, no such warning existed. 15 minutes later, Officer Johnson pulled up a same guy from my moving day. He looked just as thrilled to be back. By now, Victoria had positioned herself between me and the lake like some kind of suburban gatekeeper, clipboard in one hand, still narrating into her phone about the sanctity of community rules. When the officer stepped out of his cruiser, she pounced, launching into what sounded like a pre-scripted monologue. "Officer Johnson, this individual has been repeatedly informed of the property line boundaries. As shown on this official HOA property map, the lakefront section he attempted to enter is clearly marked as shared whole land. He does not have access rights, and I'm requesting formal enforcement of our community's property restrictions." She handed over her stack of papers with the self-assurance of someone who's done this before, and judging by the sinking feeling in my gut, I figured she had. Officer Johnson took the documents and began reviewing the map. I could see him frowning, comparing the lines on the paper to something in his own head. Officer Johnson compared the home map on Victoria's clipboard with the digital property lines on his tablet. He studied both for a long moment, then sighed like a man about to deliver news he knew I wouldn't like. He walked over slowly. "Sir," he said, voice low and almost apologetic, "based on the documents I've been shown, I'm going to need you to return to your house. I get that this is frustrating, but right now, I have to go by what's in front of me. And according to this map, you're standing on HOA property." That walk back at just 30 feet felt like the longest walk of my life. Every step felt like a silent admission that I'd lost. I could sense eyes behind every window, neighbors watching as I was essentially walked off what I believed was my own land. Victoria stood near the edge of my yard, arms folded, wearing a smug, satisfied smile, the look of someone who'd been waiting to spring a trap, and had just watched it snap shut perfectly. She had played this like a chess match, and I hadn't even realized I was a piece on the board. Back inside, I sat on the couch, staring out at the lake like it was a view behind prison bars. $500,000. That's what I paid to live on the water, but now I wasn't even allowed to dip a toe in. It felt surreal, like buying a car without an engine, or a house with locked doors you didn't get keys for. What was the point of a lakefront home if the lake was off limits? Somewhere along the line, the American dream had gotten hijacked and rewritten into a dystopian rulebook where HOA presidents had more power than actual police officers. That night, desperate for answers, I dove headfirst into researching property law. I spent hours reading about easements, riparian rights, access laws, and something called grandfathered use. A lot of it was legalese that made my head spin, but some patterns started to emerge. Time and again, I came across references to historic property rights, cases where original land deeds and long-standing usage overrode newer HOA claims. There was precedent out there. I just had to find it. And maybe Broken Bar, maybe Walter knew something. He'd hinted at complications before, at history, at a bigger story beneath the surface. What if Victoria had rewritten more than just the bylaws? Type fight back if you think I should dig deeper. Saturday morning, I found myself standing on Walter Hayes's front porch, a manila folder clutched in one hand with Victoria's official home map inside. I barely knew the guy, but something from our earlier conversation stuck with me. The way he'd said this place has history, the look in his eyes, like he'd been waiting years for someone to care enough to ask the right questions. He opened the door wearing paint-spattered overalls, a coffee mug in one hand, and reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. His expression shifted from polite surprise to quiet wariness the moment he saw what I was holding. "Morning, Jake," he said, glancing past me toward Victoria's house across the street. "What can I do for you?" I explained everything. I showed him the map, walked him through what had happened, and kept a close eye on his face as he looked over the paperwork. And then, finally, I saw it. Hope. Walter let out a low chuckle, then started laughing, really laughing, shaking his head like he'd just seen someone pull off a console bolt. It was almost impressive. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, setting his coffee down and wiping his glasses. "That's some creative cartography. Victoria's always been good with computers." Then he looked at me with a sharpness that caught me off guard. "Son, that map, it's not just inaccurate, it's fake, completely fabricated." I felt my heart start pounding. "Are you saying she just a Broken Bar made this up?" Walter nodded, then motioned toward his living room. "Come on in, You should probably hear the real story behind this place. His home looked exactly how you'd picture a retired professor's motto books stacked in every corner, deep comfortable chairs worn in just right, and the kind of organized clutter that comes from a lifetime of curiosity. He disappeared briefly into a side room and returned with a shoebox that looked like it had been through a few decades. He set it down like it was holding something important. "Your neighbor Victoria," he began, settling into a chair, "comes from what used to be the founding family of this area. Her father Henry Cross owned most of this land back in the 50s and 60s. Hundreds of acres, including the entire lake and everything around it." He opened the box and began sifting through old photographs, faded deeds, and yellowing papers. "The Cross family built their first homes out here, wrote the first neighborhood rules. Hell, they basically invented lakeside meadows." Then he paused, pulled out a black and white photograph, and handed it to me. It showed a group of serious-looking men seated at a large wooden table, papers spread out in front of them. One man at the center, tall, grim, wearing a suit, stood out. Walter tapped the photo. "That's Henry Cross, Victoria's father." This wasn't just another land deal. This meeting had legal weight. The people around him, county officials, attorneys, surveyors, the details on that table mattered. And from the look on their faces, I could tell, something big had gone down in that room. Something that maybe Broken Bar, just maybe Broken Bar, could undo everything Victoria had built her little empire on. The photograph was thick with seals and signatures, exactly the kind of official documentation that shapes communities for generations. But what truly caught my eye wasn't what was on the table, it was what stood behind it. In the background, clear as day, was a hand-painted wooden sign, "Public Lake Access, a permanent by county order." Walter pointed to the man at the center of the photo. "That's Henry Cross," he said. "This picture was taken the day he signed over the lakefront lots." He paused, then added, "Henry's whole business empire went under in '63, bad investments, some legal trouble. Everything fell apart. He had no choice but to sell off the land piece by piece just to stay afloat." Walter's finger traced the edge of the photo, slowly, deliberately. "But here's what Victoria doesn't want anyone to know. When Henry sold those lots, the county required that permanent public access to the lake be preserved." The realization hit me like a punch to the chest. "You mean a Broken Bar I do have the right to access the lake?" Walter nodded. "You and every homeowner along this stretch. It was written into the original contracts. County law required it. Even back then, water access rights were protected." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Victoria knows this. She's known it for years. She's just been betting that no one would ever look hard enough to uncover the truth." It felt like someone had just handed me the key to a locked door I didn't even know I was behind. But Walter's next words brought me crashing back to reality. "The problem is proving it," he said. "You'll need more than an old photo and my word. You'll need official documents from the county. And I'm afraid Victoria may have a Broken Bar complicated the records over the years." The way he said complicated told me he was being diplomatic. He suspected tampering or maybe even outright destruction. He walked to the window and looked across the street toward Victoria's house. "I should have spoken up years ago," he muttered. "But Victoria Broken Bar, she's got ways of making life hard for people who challenge her. Ask around, you'll hear stories about permits mysteriously held up, surprise code violations, city complaints that appear out of nowhere." He turned back to me, his eyes hardening. "But maybe it's time someone with nothing to lose stood up to her." I walked home with the photograph tucked safely into my folder, my mind spinning. If Walter was right, Victoria's entire house of cards was built on intimidation and falsified claims. But exposing it meant diving into decades-old county records, ones she might have already handled. Comment cover up if you think Victoria already destroyed the proof. Monday morning, Walter and I stood in the dim basement of the county courthouse, surrounded by filing cabinets that looked like they hadn't been opened since the Carter administration. The county clerk, a woman named Sarah with gray-streaked hair and librarian energy, looked positively thrilled to have someone interested in dusty old property records. She'd already wheeled out 3 boxes from the 1960s and was brushing off a manila folder the size of a dictionary. "You're looking for the cross-property subdivision records from 1963, right?" she asked, gently spreading the documents across the table like they were sacred artifacts. "These are fragile," she warned, "but the good news is, everything from that period was done in triplicate. Even if a copy went missing, we should still have backups." She slipped on a pair of gloves and pulled out a magnifying glass, scanning the faded carbon copies. "Here we go," she said. "Subdivision approval, March 15, 1963. She tapped a clause near the bottom of the page, nearly unreadable through the blur of age and dust. But the words were still there. "Permanent public access to lake waters shall be preserved in perpetuity for all lakefront property owners." The language was buried in legalese, but it was unmistakable. The right to lake access was not just implied, it was guaranteed. Victoria's map wasn't just strong, it flew in the face of binding county law. But then Sarah looked up. "For this to hold up in court," she said, "you'll need a current, professional land survey." These old records use outdated landmarks, some of which might not exist anymore. "You need modern documentation to verify that your property still qualifies under this clause." She handed me a card for a surveying firm that specialized in historical boundary disputes. I called them the moment I left the courthouse. The quote they gave me, $3,000. It was everything I'd saved. My entire emergency fund. Every dollar I'd set aside for furniture repairs had gone in one stroke if I went through with it. But if this were keyed a broken bar, it wouldn't just prove Victoria wrong, it would blow her entire charade wide open. I had plans to fix up the cabin, new floors, maybe finally replace the warped kitchen counters. But after that phone call with the survey company, it was clear where the money had to go. I authorized the boundary survey and spent the next week waiting and nervously a while digging through HOA financials. Because here's the thing most people don't realize. HOA budgets are public record. I filed a request for Lakeside Meadows annual reports going back 15 years. What I found made my blood boil. For a decade and a half, the HOA had been charging every household a $50 monthly lake maintenance fee, supposedly to fund shoreline upkeep and aquatic environmental preservation. 47 households, $50 a month, over 15 years. That's $423,000. But the deeper I dug, the murkier it got. There were no receipts for maintenance equipment, no contracts with environmental service providers, no records of work performed on the lake, just vague expense lines buried under administrative costs and community improvements. And when I cross-referenced those improvements with actual changes in the neighborhood, nothing matched. The money had vanished into thin air. And here's the kicker. The lake that Victoria claimed the HOA was maintaining, according to the county records, the HOA didn't even own it. I called a property law attorney to see if I was crazy. I wasn't. "If the HOA has no legal ownership or management rights," she said, "then those fees were collected under false pretenses. That's fraud. And if you can prove it, this could qualify as a class action suit. The entire neighborhood could be entitled to damages plus penalties." Her voice sharpened. "But be careful. If Victoria's been pulling this off for 15 years, she's got a strategy. She'll fight back hard." That warning was still ringing in my ears when the survey company called. It was a Friday afternoon. I was pretending to work on a coding project, but my mind was elsewhere. "Mr. Morrison," the surveyor said, "you're going to want to sit down." Not exactly the opening line that inspires calm. "Your lake access is not only legal," he continued, "it's documented. The original easement is still valida, and frankly, it's broader than most modern rights. You basically have the same privileges as someone who owns the shoreline outright." I was stunned, but he wasn't finished. "There's more," he said. "We dug into the HOA's lake maintenance claims. Based on all available records, the HOA has never owned any portion of the lake or its shoreline. They've been charging fees to maintain property they have zero legal authority over." His tone shifted to half outrage, half fascination. "This kind of thing pops up in older communities where lines get, let's say, a broken bar creatively redrawn. But this is textbook misrepresentation." I hung up the phone with my heart pounding. This wasn't just about a dock anymore. This was about justice. Victoria hadn't just denied people their legal rights as she'd spent 15 years collecting money for services she had no authority to provide. She'd defrauded an entire community, and now I had the evidence to prove it. The plan forming in my mind wasn't about reclaiming my little piece of shoreline, it was about pulling the curtain back for everyone Victoria had deceived. If she wanted to weaponize the system against the people around her, then it was time to turn that system against her. I wasn't just going to reclaim my rights, I was going to make sure the entire neighborhood saw the truth. Mr. Morrison, your lake access is 100% legal. And about those HOA, we found something interesting, a broken bar. Jake finally realizes this fight isn't just personal, it's about the entire community. What happened to the $423,000? Type expose her if you want to see Victoria get what's coming. The following week, I delivered the performance of my life. I walked the neighborhood like a man defeated, a head down, shoulders slumped, avoiding eye contact with neighbors. When I saw Victoria on her morning walks, I stood in my window just long enough for her to notice. I made sure she saw someone who looked broken, and she took the bait. Within days, she was strutting through the cul-de-sac, stapling up bright yellow "HO property" and "No trespassing" signs around the lake like a sheriff claiming stolen land. She was confident, too confident, and soon, that confidence was going to unravel one legal thread at a time. Victoria was marking her territory like a bureaucratic wolf, parading around the lake each morning with a smugness that practically radiated. She clutched her coffee cup like a trophy, strutting past the water's edge with the satisfied look of someone who thought she'd won a war. I watched her from my kitchen window, coffee in hand, quietly counting down the days, but I wasn't the only one noticing. Neighbors began murmuring. At first, it was subtly concerned glances, hesitant conversations during dog walks. But soon, the story started circulating. House 12 said Victoria had interrogated them about walking too close to the waterline. The elderly couple with the red kayaks said she'd politely suggested they might want to reconsider their morning paddles. She wasn't just enforcing rules anymore, she was claiming dominion. And then, finally, she made the mistake I'd been waiting for. An email appeared in my inbox. Subject line: Final resolution of property dispute. It was short, but devastating in the best possible way. Mr. Morrison, please be advised that final cabin removal procedures will commence within 30 days. Prepare for relocation as your current residence violates established community water access protocols. This is your final notice. I read it twice, then a third time, slowly, savoring each word like a legal symphony. She had done it. She had put the threat in writing on official whole letterhead, no less. Every lawyer I'd spoken to had told me the same thing. Get it in writing. And now I had a time-stamped, signed confession of abuse of power. While Victoria played Queen of the Lake, I was quietly laying my trap. I hired a premium security contractor and ordered a custom steel gate out, remote-controlled, industrial-grade, the kind of thing you'd expect at a corporate compound. When they asked about permits, I smiled and said I'd be filing directly through the county, bypassing the HOA entirely. Because here's the part Victoria never expected. When you own the land, you don't need her permission. I didn't stop there. I installed a full perimeter security camera system in multiple angles, night vision, cloud storage. Every inch of my property and the adjoining lake access was covered. If she tried anything, I'd have it all in high definition. Walter called me the night before the installation. He sounded nervous. "You sure about this?" he asked. "Victoria doesn't lose quietly. She's got connections, resources. She'll come after you any way she can," I reassured him. "She thinks she's already won," I said. "Let her believe it. Sometimes, the best defense is giving your enemy the illusion of victory." I didn't sleep much that night. I ran through every detail in my head: a timing, legal documents, camera angles, potential witnesses. Everything had to align perfectly, because tomorrow, I wasn't just going to defend my rights. I was going to dismantle Victoria's imperi publicly. 6:00 a.m., a diesel engine rumbled into my driveway. The steel gate installation truck had arrived. It was huge and unmistakable. Neighbors peeked out of windows. Dog walkers slowed down. People noticed. The crew was professional, precise, and fully credentialed. They had county permits, insurance, inspection tags, everything. The install was 100% legal. And right on cue, Victoria appeared. I saw her freeze mid-stride on her morning walk, eyes locked on the truck. Her mouth hung open just long enough for the anger to catch up. Then came the phone. She whipped it out like a weapon, face contorting into the familiar expression of someone about to deliver a final lesson. Early morning, steel gate crew in the driveway. Victoria spots them, freezes, reaches for her phone with that "I'll show him" look. What's she going to do now? She stormed across the street like a general leading a charge, phone pressed to her ear, voice already raised before she even reached my property. "Officer Johnson, this is Victoria Cross. I need immediate police response to Lakeside Meadows. The Morrison property is installing unauthorized structures on whole land in direct violation of community standards and in defiance of my written warnings." She was practically shouting and making sure everyone within earshot heard. Neighbors stepped outside to see what the commotion was about. I stepped onto my porch, clipboard in hand, calm as a still lake. The crew kept working. Victoria paced the sidewalk like she was directing a battlefield, pointing at my property and yelling into her phone like she was calling in an airstrike. She had no idea she was playing the final scene of her own undoing. "Yes, officer, I have documented violations on file. Yes, I have the official HOA property maps," Victoria declared, her voice tight with self-righteous urgency. "This individual has been warned multiple times about trespassing, and now he's escalated to destruction of community property." She ended the call and turned toward me with a smug little smile that made my stomach turn. "You have no idea what you've just started," she said, her voice dripping with menace. "But you're about to find out why we have rules in this community." 15 minutes later, Officer Johnson arrived, stepping out of his cruiser with the body language of someone who'd rather be dealing with anything else. Still, he was professional. Nodded at both of us, then asked, "All right, what's going on here?" Victoria immediately launched into her speech, a clearly rehearsed, complete with a manila folder of cherry-picked evidence and that same fake map she'd been brandishing for weeks. "Officer," she began, voice stern and theatrical, "this individual is illegally installing structures on HOA-controlled land. This is a direct violation of community standards." I let her finish every word. Then I calmly stepped forward and handed Officer Johnson my own folder. "Here's the official county surveyor's report," I said evenly. "Historical property records dating back to 1963, and the county issued building permits for this installation all properly filed." I watched her confidence start to splinter the moment the officer flipped open my folder. Unlike her documents, mine had embossed seals, real signatures, county letterheads, things that couldn't be faked on a home printer. Officer Johnson took his time. He compared her map to the official survey, cross-checked my permits in his patrol car's computer, reviewed the historical documents Walter and I had painstakingly gathered. With each passing minute, Victoria's posture sagged just a little more. Finally, Officer Johnson looked up. "Mrs. Cross," he said, his tone neutral but final, "according to county records, this is private property. It includes grandfathered lake access rights. Mr. Morrison is fully within his legal rights to install this gate." Victoria didn't answer. Her face shifted through a series of pale, stunned expressions until she landed on a ghostly shade of white. She looked like someone who'd just realized the walls were closing in. And that's when the crowd began to form. Neighbors had trickled out, drawn by the police car, the crew, and Victoria's theatrics. A small gathering had taken shape along the sidewalk. Walter showed up too, holding the old black and white photo from 1963, grinning like a man who had finally watched justice catch up. I spotted the woman from House 12, the Kaya couple, even a few residents I remembered from my door-to-door petitioning. Victoria looked around. She realized this wasn't just a private embarrassment anymore, it was public. "Since we're all here," I said, raising my voice to the growing crowd, "there's something I think you should know about our HOA dues." I opened my folder again, this time to a section I had labeled in bold, "Financial discrepancies." For the past 15 years, we've each been paying $50 a month in lake maintenance fees. That's $600 a year. Collectively, that's $47,000 collected by the HOA just for this lake. A ripple went through the crowd. Curious expressions turned into furrowed brows. "There's just one problem," I said, holding up the official survey and county land records. According to these documents, the HOA doesn't own a single inch of the lake, not the water, not the shoreline, not the access, nothing. The murmurs became an uproar. The what? The woman from House 12 snapped. $47,000? The elderly man with the kayak was doing mental math out loud. That's over $9,000 for my wife and me. Broken bar. Voices began to pile up, fast and angry. Where's the money? What maintenance? Show us receipts. Are you kidding me? Someone started recording, then someone else. Within seconds, phones were out everywhere capturing Victoria, wide-eyed and cornered in the middle of an increasingly outraged crowd. 15 years, the man from House 18 shouted. 15 years of FESA for nothing. A woman I didn't recognize stepped forward, voice trembling. My husband and I are on a fixed income. We sacrificed to pay those fees. The elderly woman with the kayaks looked heartbroken. We could have flown out to visit our grandkids. We saved for those payments. Victoria tried to retreat, but the crowd had closed in. There was no escape, no more control, no HOA badge to flash, no empty threats to make. She stood frozen, surrounded by neighbors demanding answers she couldn't give, holding documents that now looked like paper shields against a rising storm. Please, she finally whispered. For the first time since I'd met her, Victoria's voice lost its usual edge. It was small now, unsteady. I was trying to protect the community, she said quietly. Trying to preserve what my father built, but no one was buying it. The woman from House 12 stepped forward. You weren't protecting anything, Victoria. You were stealing from us. Victoria tried to regain control, raising her voice above the rising anger. The fees went to administrative costs, environmental protection, upkeep. Administrative costs for what? Someone shouted from the back. What environmental protection? Another neighbor demanded. Where's the equipment? The records? Show us something real. She had nothing. She was surrounded now, boxed in by neighbors who wanted answers, holding papers she couldn't defend and facing questions she couldn't answer. $47,000, Victoria, someone called out. Where did it go? I watched her cycle through excuses, each more desperate, more hollow than the last. Then Walter stepped forward. He held up the 1963 photograph like it was evidence in court. I've lived here longer than anyone, he said, his voice calm and clear, like a man used to speaking in front of students. And I've stayed quiet long enough. He turned the photo for everyone to see. It showed Victoria's father, pen in hand, signing away the property. And right behind him, Walter continued, pointing, is the sign, Public Lake Access 8 permanent by county order. A wave of realization moved through the crowd. This wasn't just mismanagement, it was a lie Victoria had known about for years. She made one last attempt to salvage her story. My father built this community, she shouted, her voice cracking. My family gave everything for this place. I was trying to preserve what he created. But her tears didn't move anyone. Not this time, not after 15 years of deception. Preserve what? Someone snapped. You banned us from our own lake and charged us for the privilege. I walked over to the new gate, mounted the bronze plaque I'd commissioned, and read the inscription aloud as I screwed it in. Public Lake Access A grandfathered easement. 1963 HOA has no authority. Then I pulled out the remote, pressed the button, and watched as the gate slid closed with a firm, final click. It echoed louder than any speech. Victoria stood frozen, watching as the very symbol of her power, her control, shut in her face. The aftermath came quickly. Neighbors began talking about legal action to recover the stolen dues. Someone said they were contacting the state attorney general to report HOA fraud. Others were already organizing a vote to replace the entire HOA board. Victoria walked away slowly, her manila folder hanging at her side like a broken flag. Her shoulders slumped, her legacy, undone. And then, something beautiful happened. A little girl broke free from her parents and ran straight toward the lake, laughing as she splashed into the water for the first time in years. Mom! She yelled, grinning. We can finally go swimming. Her laughter sparked something. Other families followed. They strolled down to the shoreline cautiously at first and then freely, joyfully, like they were reclaiming something they'd forgotten they owned. I turned to Walter and handed him the gate remote. For the neighbor who told the truth when it counted. He took it, eyes misting over, and nodded without a word. By that evening, the video of Victoria's unraveling and the gate-clicking shootout had gone viral on local community boards. #Karma trended for hours. Stories from other neighborhoods began to pour in, of people sharing their own battles, their own frustrations with overreaching HOAs. Sometimes, David really does beat Goliath, and sometimes, it's not just about winning. It's about doing what's right even when the system is stacked against you. The lake is ours now, just like it always should have been.